Seeing clearly, without blinders or blindfolds, illusion or confusion, looking consciously, wide openly, without looking away, seeing straight to the bottom of the waters, of yourself, of others, of everything before you, all things below, above, and around, your mind, your heart, your present moment, your future. And in that clear blue sky seeing, you find that your choosing, your living, your loving becomes so natural. Moving wisely through your days, engaging the world confidently, becomes usual. And the beauty, and in the eyes of those you know, comes often and easily, so affirmingly, when you're open, able, committed, no matter what or where it leads, to see everything clearly. Welcome to each of you listening in right now to the 28th floating poetry broadcast in this weekly series, coming to you live from the coast of Rhode Island by the sea, the clear streaming sea. Thanks for taking the time and interest to lean in from across the country and world. This is your poet and poetorialist, Colin Goedecke, inviting and encouraging you to reflect together, all of us, each and all, tonight, on your interest, your desire to incline toward clear or clearer living, on thinking, feeling, and engaging your inner and outer world from a place of great clarity, out of which all else vital, remarkable, can spring, can flow, can flower, from deep realizations to emotionally healthier interactions to wiser life choices, not to mention sheer delight and wonder. So let's begin with some ponderings of mine, followed by a handful of thoughts from others, then open to various poems I've chosen around our theme of living clearly. Living from a place of clearness, of inner clarity. For years, I, like many, were culturally conditioned and otherwise caught up in people and things being right or wrong, and allowing myself to be subject to that, to me, limiting mindset of others and myself. Over time and full-on self-development and evolution since then, I arrived at a place and way of living and being and choosing. It's based on being clear. As the poet Rumi says in one of his poems, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. When it's clear, when there's a clear knowingness, then I know how to proceed, how to act or interact, how to respond. I don't need to be, quote, right. I just need to be clear in myself from a root place, especially of heart, of spirit. Everything flows from that, I found. It flows from that. My intuition, that inner guidance system we all have when we learn to sense and trust and follow it, that I spoke of in the last broadcast on that theme, is what I rely on every day. It's also, in essence, the thrust of my debut poetry collection, The Speed of Sight, which was all about the immediacy and clarity of, quote, seeing, not just with the eyes, but with all the senses, with the emotions and imagination, full-on seeing, full spectrum seeing, we might say. Seeing and feeling with greater clearness into things. So, where are you on a spectrum of desired clarity? From unclear or opaque to crystal clear, if we thought of that as one wavelength or arc. Who or what's helping you become clearer? Or what's keeping you from becoming clearer? Regardless, I'm encouraging you to seek, to find, and feel that empowering inner sense and voice of clarity, of head to toe clarifying to bring to your daily living. Because when you do have it, or intently cultivate it and act on it, move with it, it cuts through all or most of the noise, confusion, frustration, and nonsense. It leads you to such decisiveness and acceptance, leads you to a wealth of well-being, and not least, at least in my experience, reveals a far richer world of beauty, equanimity, and so much remarkability. All right, on to some thoughts and then some poems. Carl Jung said, "Your visions will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes." The author Eudora Welty, who also did a lot of photographing of her subjects at times, and is using that bit of that perspective with us here. She said, "We come to terms as well as we can with our lifelong exposure to the world, and we use whatever devices we may need to survive. But eventually, of course, our knowledge depends upon the living relationship between what we see going on and ourselves. If exposure is essential, still more so is the reflection. Insight doesn't happen often on the click of the moment, like a lucky snapshot, but comes in its own time and more slowly and from nowhere but within. The sharpest recognition is surely that which is charged with sympathy as well as with shock. It is a form of human vision, and that is, of course, a gift." The British theorist and philosopher E.F. Schumacher, who wrote Small is Beautiful, but this is from his book, his other book, A Guide for the Perplexed, said, "When the level of the knower is not adequate to the level or grade of significance of the object of knowledge, the result is not factual error, but something much more serious, an inadequate and impoverished view of reality." Interesting, very provocative. Henry David Thoreau, in 1860, he was 43 years old, and he had soon after fell fatally ill. And this he wrote in his journal at that point: "A man receives only what he is ready to receive. We hear and apprehend only what we already half know. If there is something which does not concern me, which is out of my line, which by experience or by genius my attention is not drawn to, however novel and remarkable it may be, if it is spoken, we hear it not. If it is written, we read it not. Or if we read it, it does not detain us. Every man thus tracks himself through life in all his hearing and reading and observation and traveling. His observations make a chain, the phenomenon or fact that cannot in any wise be linked with the rest, which he has observed, he does not observe. By and by, we may be ready to receive what we cannot receive now." Thank you, Henry David Thoreau. The contemplative guide, Craig Hamilton, I think I've mentioned him before. He talked about consciousness and culture, and he not that far back in time here said, "There's a kind of fundamental attachment to security, safety, and certainty that drives so much of human behavior. In a sense, when we're talking about the ego, we're talking about the fundamental need to feel safe and secure. It's a need to know what's going to happen next and have a sense of certainty in the face of all of the overwhelming complexity and challenges of life. The ego is trying to create an unrealistic sense of security in an insecure world. This leads to a lot of distortion and much of our self-centered behavior. The point is that we're not very evolved yet, and when I say we, I mean pretty much the whole human race. Even the handful of people who are really enlightened and evolved are still in a process of evolution. The human condition is still rooted in all kinds of deeply primitive programming that is not suited for the world we're living in, nor is it suited for the world we want to create. So a big part of evolving the world is this deep interior work of evolving ourselves. That means that as an individual, I need to be willing to face in excruciating detail the ways that I'm still participating in the same inner patterns that are causing all the problems in the world. It's easy for any of us to look at the world around us and point out thousands of cruel, oppressive, and violent injustices happening every day. What I'm suggesting is that each of us needs to also look deep into our own psyches and look honestly at our own behavior to see the ways in which we are driven by the very same unevolved impulses that are at the root of human cruelty and oppression. In what ways are we living from the same sense of scarcity, fear, and selfishness that drives people to oppress and harm others in order to get more for themselves? This is something that most people have a very hard time facing, because the fact we're participating in the same dynamics that lead to it all means we can't be totally sure what we would do if push came to shove. Also provocative. Craig Hamilton. The brilliant writer, British, or rather media theorist and political critic Walter Lippmann from 1922, he was talking about perspective and in that time. And he said, looking back, we can see how indirectly we know the environment in which nevertheless we live. We can see that the news of it comes to us now fast, now slowly, but that whatever we believe to be a true picture, we treat as if it were the environment itself. It is harder to remember that about the beliefs upon which we are now acting, but in respect to other peoples and other ages, we flatter ourselves that it is easy to see when they were in deadly earnest about ludicrous pictures of the world. We insist, because of our superior hindsight, that the world as they needed to know it and the world as they did know it were often two quite contradictory things. We can see, too, that while they governed and fought, traded and reformed in the world as they imagined it to be, they produced results, or failed to produce any, in the world as it was. They started for the Indies and found America. They diagnosed evil and hanged old women. They thought they could grow rich by always selling and never buying. A caliph, obeying what he conceived to be the will of Allah, burned the library at Alexandria. So he had one succinct prescription for effective critical thinking, and I think that's part of the basis of helping us get clear. He distills it down and says, in truly effective thinking, the prime necessity is to liquidate judgments, regain an innocent eye, disentangle feelings, be curious and open-hearted. It's fairly wise. Fairly wise. So is Erich Fromm, the philosopher, who, talking about the destructiveness of global groupthink, which we seem to also be experiencing right now, at least parts of the globe. He says, and he wrote this a while ago, way before now, what is so deceptive about the state of mind of the members of a society is the consensual, quote, consensual validation of their concepts. It is naively assumed that the fact that the majority of people share certain ideas or feelings proves the validity of these ideas and feelings. Nothing is further from the truth. Consensual validation as such has no bearing whatsoever on reason or mental health. The fact that millions of people share the same vices does not make these vices virtues. The fact that they share so many errors does not make the errors to be truths. And the fact that millions of people share the same forms of mental pathology does not make these people sane. Annie Dillard, the writer, on a different kind of seeing, less perhaps philosophical, less metaphorical, symbolic, on unobstructed clarity, I suppose we could call it. When I see this way, I sway transfixed and emptied. The difference between the two ways of seeing is the difference between walking with and without a camera. When I walk with a camera, I walk from shot to shot, reading the light on a calibrated meter. When I walk without a camera, my own shutter opens, and the moment's light prints on my own silver gut. When I see this second way, I am above all an unscrupulous observer. Saying unobstructed, wide open. The cognitive scientist Alexandra Horowitz, in her book, The Art of Looking, delightful book, interesting book, takes a walk with in a way with 12 different characters from Sherlock Holmes to philosophers and so on, so to speak, and how they would have seen things or what they would see. And she said part of normal human development is learning to notice less than we are able to. The world is awash in details of color, form, sound, but to function, we have to ignore some of it. The world still holds these details. Children sense the world at a different granularity, attending to parts of the visual world we gloss over, to sounds we have dismissed as irrelevant. What is indiscernible to us is plain to them. I love that. So getting in touch with our childlikeness also creates a kind of a dimension of clarity, a kind of. The great Victorian art critic, philosopher, and philanthropist John Ruskin, we'll wind out our thoughts with him. He said, from the most insignificant circumstance, from a bird on a railing, a wooden bridge over a stream, a broken branch, a child in a pinafore, or a wagoner in a frock, does the artist derive amusement, improvement, and speculation. In everything it is the same. Where a common eye sees only a white cloud, the artist observes the exquisite gradations of light and shade, the loveliness of the mingled colors, red, purple, gray, golden, and white, the graceful roundings of form, the shadowy softness of the melted outline, the brightness without luster, the transparency without faintness, and the beautiful mildness of the deep heaven. Thank you, John Ruskin. So some poems, and apropos of that and clouds. This is a poem called Cloud by the Anglo-Irish writer Eamon Grennan, Grennan, one of my favorites. You might enjoy him. Cloud. There comes in middle life a moment when everything is very solid and seems to stand foursquare in its own hard, uncompromising light. But soon it's the shimmer of things that begins to grow on you. The solid starts to waver, fold, dissolve, flow. Hills are just undulant lines of color, mobile as massy clouds that trawl their shadows across a sea of grass. And you can see the way the big light races after shadow and how things live in both. Metal benches, leaves, a sky blue trike, the spotted brass knocker on that green hall door, a glint of rain-lit kitchen windows. And this is the moment you start to catch the sound it makes as it happens. Passing traffic and the stew of birdsong, telephones ringing in different keys, a door banging, all the babies on the block in chorus. And over everything, the pitiless squeak of clotheslines or a wind racketing in the fuchsia or honey locust. When day darkened, we used to say, the sun's gone in. Now we know it is the clouds in their ceaseless, indifferent, high bright life and shade, going over. Eamon Grennan, Cloud. You know, the inner eye, our soul eye, we might say, is so vital to keep open, to never close, and to help us be clear on a far, obviously, more fundamental or deeper spirit level. So this is a poem that I composed a few years back in out in New Jersey in Common Station. It's called Open Your Eye. Your third eye, the inner, all-seeing one, where higher consciousness resides, can preside, that closed even halfway can shine no deeper vision or greater wisdom, but wide open can tune to the higher vibrations of the universe, can gaze mystically within and extrasensorily, extraordinarily sensitively without. Open your eye. I believe that until we can see ourselves clearly, one can, more fully, more deeply, it's hard to see the world around you with great focus, with beautiful focus, with true focus, maybe. And this is called I'm Seeing. Not for the first time, but now, more definitively, a deep knowing in my eyes, when I look right into them, when they look so sentiently back at me in the moving mirror. There's an exercise apropos that I learned to do and propose to others. Not easy at all. Where you quietly stand in front of a mirror until it's no longer, you're no longer looking at the reflection. The reflection is you looking at you standing there. It's the complete reversal. It's quite surprising and intense, and some people can't do it for long if they can even get to it, but I'd suggest maybe experimenting with that. I was thinking about what brings clarity, and sometimes it's a tectonic life shift. It could be a great illness. It could be a death of someone close to you. It could be the breakup of a relationship, like heartbreaks, I know in my own case, can take you to a very needed and appreciated clearing of a kind in your life. And I wrote that in relation to my own one time, one particular great heartbreak. And it's called Catharsis to Apotheosis. When the fever spike of high emotions, the marlin spike of high tensions, the mystifying questions are released, unraveled, there's titanic relief. You return to a steady as you go self, but your heart, even the beats and the feelings in your bones while there, are no longer the same, have clearly reset in some tectonic way to another kind of resonance. A sureness, yes, but also a curious lighterness, and your mind's eye, soul's eye, sees now, spies now, a before unseen opening in the sky it can rise to, go through, grow through, in a humbly, humanly, godly way. David White has a poem I felt fitting for our theme, Mameen, M-A-M-E-E-N, Mameen. Be infinitesimal under that sky, a creature even the sailing hawk misses, a wraith among the rocks where the mist parts slowly. Recall the way mere mortals are overwhelmed by circumstance, how great reputations dissolve with infirmity, and how you, in particular, live a hair's breadth from losing everyone you hold dear. Then look back down the path as if seeing your past, and then south over the hazy blue coast as if present to a wide future. Remember the way you are all possibilities you can see, and how you live best as an appreciator of horizons, whether you reach them or not. Admit that once you have got up from your chair and opened the door, once you have walked out into the clean air, toward that edge, and taken the path up high beyond the ordinary, you have become the privileged and the pilgrim, the one who will tell the story, and the one coming back from the mountain who helped to make it. Thank you, David White, for that. Other things that I believe, and from my experience, have helped us get to clarity involve stripping away of things, and especially material things. And this came out of an experience I had where I wanted to break out of all these comparisons that we get up to about valuing people based on what they have versus who they are. And this is called under the skin. Let's take away the trappings, especially the bank accounts, everything added. Subtract. Strip all the way down to your skin. I'll do the same. Then let's be here with nothing but our flesh and bones, breath and blood, eyes and souls, hearts, hands, and see how we each stand, where we each really, relatively are, in simply ourselves. Under the skin. Some of you would no doubt agree that we often, to get to clearer, takes going far within, taking a literal or self-retreat. This is called hibernacle. So it's that combination of hibernation and tabernacle, if you will. That sort of a sacred place, hibernacle. A sanctuary for one embering spirit, out of public view, other people's reach. A sacred inner place, where fresh bread and honest wine for the soul are kept, to nourish it whenever more nourishment, more replenishment is needed. A hallowed place where we can each learn to find, enter, be, for communing in solitude with our source, our kindling essence. Hibernacle. As a poet, I am ever seeking the essences of experiences, the distillations where the clearer they are, the more felt, more transporting for me they are, and I'm able to not just relate to them, but be inspired by them and move to either visual poetry or written poetry, spoken, or other inspirations that are poetic, lyrical, and exultant. So this occurred to me about spiritual tourism, which some of us may have heard of, and this is called not a spiritual tourist. Fine if you're one who wants point-and-shoot moments of far-flung, well-hung spiritual movements, selfies from old and new self-development courses, books, gurus, discourses. But not for me. I'm here for the genuine articles, seeking and living all the way into and radiantly out from the essential spiritual being I am inside this body, inside this earth suit, seeking everything meaningful behind the facades, under the surfaces, flowing through the molecules. Not a spiritual tourist. One more as we come toward the end now of our time today. Here is two other people's poems and then a little quote and then me to wind us out. Another David Whyte poem, because it's so good and because it underscores that idea of committing to the clearness of deep inner truth. Committing to it. We've got to commit. If we want to get to clearness, we have to commit to it and stay with it to sustain it. And if you haven't heard this poem, one of my great favorites, read it many times in many places, and here we are. All the true vows. All the true vows are secret vows. The ones we speak out loud are the ones we break. There is only one life you can call your own, and 1,000 others you can call by any name you want. Hold to the truth you make every day with your own body. Don't turn your face away. Hold to your own truth at the center of the image you were born with. Those who do not understand their destiny will never understand the friends they have made, nor the work they have chosen, nor the one life that waits beyond all the others. By the lake, in the wood, in the shadows, you can whisper that truth to the quiet reflection you see in the water. Whenever you hear from the water, remember, it wants you to carry the sound of its truth on your lips. Remember, in this place, no one can hear you, and out of the silence, you can make a promise it will kill you to break. That way, you'll find what is real and what is not. I know what I am saying. Time almost forsook me, and I looked again. Seeing my reflection, I broke a promise and spoke for the first time and after all these years in my own voice, before it was too late to turn my face again. All the true vows. Thank you, David Whyte. The poet William Stafford, a poem on awakening, on being awake. For when we're wide awake, we're also very clear, always very clear when we're wide awake, in that deeper awakenedness idea state. A ritual to read to each other. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal in the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending with shouts the horrible errors of childhood storming out to play, through the broken dike. And as elephants parade holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty, to know what occurs but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. That we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life gets lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes or no, or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. Thank you, William Stafford. And next to last is a thought from Percy Bysshe Shelley, the poet, about poetry. All things exist as they are perceived, at least in relation to the percipient. The mind is its own place, and of itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. But poetry defeats the curse which binds us to be subjected to the accident of surrounding impressions, and whether it spreads its own figured curtain or withdraws life's dark veil from before the scene of things, it equally creates for us a being within our being. It makes us the inhabitants of a world to which the familiar world is a chaos. It reproduces the common universe of which we are portions and percipients, and it purges us from our inward sight the film of familiarity, which obscures from us the wonders of our being. That's marvelous. Thank you, Shelley. And last poem, and then a goodbye. Sadly, there are long-time dimensions of our culture, acculturation that, at least in the West, that often keeps us from our natural clearness, creates fog, confusion, and ambiguity, among other things. So we, I feel, need to swim vigorously against that current like the salmon swimming upstream, or the opposite direction. Defying the law is this last poem for now. Defying the law. To live outside the law of gravity. Law you swallowed whole. Not the Newtonian one that applied to into Sir Isaac's head. The cultural one that weighs down the boughs of fellow men, of otherwise fine women, friends, siblings, unsprung offspring, that pins them hard and fast to time and space, like butterflies encased unnaturally under glass. To reverse or obverse your expected play of being, that insistent pull to adhere, conform, congrue. Exiting stage left or right, the usual, now rather suspect rules of social physics. Once you discover there's nothing at all to hold you down or back or in, but theories too unleavened, unlevitated to bother with, be bound by, when at last you see, you feel, you know, you can float free and clear. You can fly. Thank you, each and all again, for listening in with good heart and mind, senses and spirit, and during these pressing times helping sustain these programs and poetic arts, literally with your donations and energetically with your enthusiasms. Your contributions are so welcome and easily makeable by PayPal and Venmo and directly through my site, as are invitations from patrons to have me as an artist in residence for a month or a season, or to sponsor a new poetic arts project. I also invite your questions, sparked by this or earlier broadcasts. I'll respond to them in a live program I'm planning before year end. Send an email along to me at colin@thepoetorialist.com. And remember, all the shows are online for replay and to share freely with your circles. I invite you to lean in next week or soon again. Until then, dear listeners, good days ahead, days of living clearly, and good spirits.